Do you think Queen Anne Boleyn was simply beheaded? The truth is, by the time the blade fell, she was already dead on the inside. What you're about to uncover isn't just an execution. It's a cold, methodical process, a silent operation designed to erase a woman from the political map, from public memory, and from the official record of history. Few people know that before the final blow, and endured something even more cruel, all of it orchestrated not by foreign enemies, but by her own husband, King Henry VIII. She was accused of adultery, incest, and treason against the king. Absurd charges, built on weak evidence and manipulated testimonies. But none of that mattered. The goal was never truth, it was to remove her from the path. Completely, publicly, humiliatingly. Her execution was staged as a spectacle, not just to end her life but to erase her image. The idea that Anne was simply condemned and executed for her mistakes is a convenient narrative. But what truly happened was a calculated use of power to eliminate someone from history. Legally, silently, and effectively. In this video, you'll understand how her story unfolded in a grim, tragic way, and why Anne Boleyn's death was far more horrific than most people think. Anne Boleyn rose to the English throne at one of the most turbulent moments in European history. In 1533, she became queen consort after Henry VIII broke from the Roman Church, an unprecedented act, just to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon and be with Anne. It wasn't a peaceful or ordinary rise, and symbolized a new political and religious order. And with that came allies and enemies. By the king's side, Anne was far from a decorative figure. Intelligent, outspoken, and politically sharp, she directly influenced royal decisions and supported the English Reformation, opening the door for Protestantism and challenging centuries of papal authority. Her influence grew, and that started to make people uneasy. Henry expected her to give him a male heir, but Anne gave birth only to a daughter, the future Elizabeth I. Several failed pregnancies deepened the king's frustration. Meanwhile, Anne accumulated power in the court and councils, a rare feat for a woman at the time. This created tension, and in the Tudor court, tension was always the prelude to downfall. In May 1536, the blow came. Anne was arrested and taken to the Tower of London. The charges: adultery, incest, and plotting against the king. Among her supposed lovers was her own brother, George Boleyn. Today, historians like Eric Ives and Allison Were agree. The charges were fabricated, likely engineered by Thomas Cromwell, Henry's powerful chief minister, who saw Anne as a political threat. Her imprisonment marked the beginning of the end. For 17 days, Anne was locked in the Tower, cut off from the outside world. The isolation was total, and the cruelest part, she didn't know when she would die. Her execution was delayed over and over, a documented form of psychological torture at the time, to keep the prisoner in constant anticipation of death. To slowly break the mind, she was interrogated, subjected to outrageous accusations, charged with affairs involving multiple men at court, including musicians and servants, and with having an incestuous relationship with her brother. No solid evidence, no fair trial, just a parade of humiliation. Accounts from the time describe her behavior in prison as cheerful, calm, even playful. But that wasn't serenity, it was dissociation, a psychological defense mechanism, the mind and body detaching in order to survive prolonged terror, and no longer reacted with rage or despair. She seemed to be somewhere else, disconnected from reality, one of the clearest signs of psychological collapse. That detail is often overlooked, but it's essential to understand what really happened. The execution didn't start at the scaffold. It began there, among the cold stones of the Tower, where she was slowly stripped of everything: her freedom, her identity, and her sanity. And when the execution was finally scheduled, the setting and method chosen revealed even more about what was really behind the operation. The death had to be public, visible, symbolic, but also clean. Henry VIII ordered a swordsman to be brought in from France, a gesture that, at first glance, might seem merciful. After all, a sword was faster and more precise than the traditional English axe. But there was something more at play. Bringing in a foreign executioner wasn't just an act of compassion, it was theater. a carefully calculated detail meant to give the execution an air of control, sophistication, even civilized justice. The king wanted everything to be remembered not as an act of rage, but as a deliberate decision, befitting an absolute monarch. The French sword was not mercy, it was spectacle. The scaffold was built deliberately low. This forced the spectators to stand close, to see everything up close. It was harder to detach from the horror when it happened almost within arm's reach, and the public was encouraged to attend, to witness the fall of a queen who had once been hated by many and feared by others. Henry's absence at the execution is another revealing detail. He wasn't there. While Anne knelt at the scaffold, he remained at Whitehall, waiting only for word that it was done. The same king who shattered Europe's religious order for this woman now waited, at a distance, for confirmation of her death. There was no remorse, only indifference, both political and personal. Moments before the execution, Anne Boleyn was granted the right to speak, a traditional privilege given to those condemned to die. But in the case of a deposed queen, every word carried political weight. There was no real freedom, only limits and risks. She confessed to no crime. Not once did she admit guilt, but she also didn't attack the king or question the justice of her sentence, and declared herself subject to the law, according to the will of God, and asked that prayers be said for her. It was a composed, carefully measured speech, and this was not weakness, it was strategy, and knew that any provocation, any poorly chosen word, could have direct consequences for her daughter, Elizabeth. After Anne's conviction, Elizabeth had already been declared illegitimate. A defiant speech could seal the child's fate even further. In that moment, Anne was speaking both as a queen and as a mother. Historians interpret this behavior as Anne Boleyn's final political act, not to beg for forgiveness, but also not to directly confront the king. A delicate balance between preserving her dignity and protecting the little that could still be saved. The execution itself was quiet. It followed the French protocol, and was beheaded kneeling without needing to lie down on a block, as was customary in English executions. The swordsman, trained specifically for this moment, had already rehearsed the position and movement to ensure a single, clean blow. He used a psychological trick to reduce the victim's fear. He called for his assistant to hand him the sword, while in reality, he already held it, hidden behind his back. As soon as Anne turned her head, the strike was delivered, quick, precise, without warning, but no less brutal. Witnesses described the moment with unease. Thomas Wyatt, a poet and contemporary, described the brutality in restrained, almost cold terms. He referred to Anne's throat, once adorned with jewels, necklaces, and symbols of status, now cut, exposed, vulnerable. The same throat that had once spoken boldly in court, now silenced forever. Anne Boleyn was buried hastily in an improvised wooden box, without proper identification. No coffin, no tombstone, no honors. There was no funeral, no ceremony. In addition, portraits were destroyed, coats of arms erased, and her name became taboo at court. A systematic effort to erase her memory from official history. The goal was clear, not just to eliminate Anne physically, but to erase her as a symbol. Anne Boleyn's death wasn't just the end of a queen, it was the beginning of a long shadow that would stretch over the lives of those she left behind, especially her daughter, Elizabeth. After the execution, Elizabeth was declared illegitimate. She lost the title of princess, was removed from the line of succession, and grew up under constant watch. She lived in palaces, but without security. In a world where alliances shifted overnight, she had to learn early to hide her emotions, to watch in silence, and to survive in a world where her very existence was seen as a threat. The marks left by her mother's execution never faded. They shaped Elizabeth and shaped the future of the English monarchy. But she wasn't the only one who felt the impact. Many women at court who had once served and left palace life after her death. Records show that the execution of a queen shook the emotional foundation of the female elite of the time. It wasn't just the death of a woman. It was a clear message. No position, no matter how high, could protect a woman from the absolute power of the king. The court was gripped by fear, and that fear wasn't accidental. It was cultivated. Henry VIII used silence and repression as political tools. Anne's execution became a warning, a way to remind everyone who made the rules and how the consequences for breaking them could be final. For centuries, Anne Boleyn's image was shaped by the victors. Official chroniclers, working for the crown, created romanticized or distorted versions of her life and death. She was portrayed as ambitious, manipulative, perhaps even guilty. All of it meant to justify what had happened. But over time, a different truth began to emerge. Modern historians like Eric Ives, Retha Warnick, and David Starkey have examined the documents, letters, and records of the time, and their conclusions are clear. Anne Boleyn's death was not justice. It was a state operation, a political assassination. She was eliminated for being a threat to the established order, to male authority, religious tradition, and the king's absolute power. Today, her execution is seen through a different lens, that of political femicide. Anne Boleyn was silenced because she dared to exist outside the role that was expected of her, because she thought, influenced, and made decisions. And in that era, that was unacceptable. It was an attempt to erase a voice, a name, an idea. But what Henry VIII could never foresee was that, centuries later, Anne would become exactly what he tried to destroy: a symbol of resistance, of intelligence amid chaos, of quiet courage in the face of an empire built to crush her. Today, by uncovering the truth behind her execution, the isolation, the manipulations, the theater of death, we're not just remembering a queen, we're recognizing how power can be used to distort justice and shape collective memory, and how, even so, the truth always finds its way. If this video helped you see the story through a different lens, leave a like. It shows that stories like this deserve to keep being told. And if you want to go even deeper into the dark backstage of power, politics, and history's hidden perversions, subscribe to the channel now. There's still much more to uncover. And speaking of revelations, if you thought Anne Boleyn's story was disturbing, wait until you learn about the young castrated boy who became the pleasure object of Emperor Nero, a forgotten episode of ancient Rome that's just as bizarre as it is real. Click now on the video appearing on your screen. Believe me, you won't be the same after watching it.